If life feels harder, it is not random. We are reaching the end of a cycle. Empires rise and fall. When they do, everyday life changes first. According to Ray Dalio, what we are experiencing today is not unique, not chaotic, and not unprecedented. Dalio explains that world orders do not change randomly, and that no dominant system lasts forever. To understand why the world order changes, we have to look at patterns, not headlines. As we discussed in a previous video on the patterns behind imperial collapse, the same cycle has repeated itself across every major power: Spain, England, the United States. And today, China is moving through the rising side of that same cycle. The big cycle, how power moves when we look back at the last 500 years of history, a familiar structure appears. Great powers don't collapse overnight. They evolve. In his research on long-term world orders, outlined in Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Dalio shows that major powers tend to move through similar stages over time. This isn't about ideology. It's about structure. The common phases of great powers. Across history, powerful nations typically move through the birth of a new system, rising productivity and competition, expansion through trade and influence, growing debt and financialization, increased money creation, internal and external tensions, and, eventually, a system reset. Not because leaders repeat mistakes, but because systems behave in predictable ways. Money, debt, and erosion. When a country can issue its own currency without limits, it gains the freedom to grow, expand, and finance large ambitions. At first, this feels like strength. Growth comes easier, promises get bigger, and problems can always be pushed a little further into the future. Over time, though, debt builds quietly. More money is created to deal with old obligations. Slowly, money and debt begin feeding each other, creating a loop that feeds on itself. What changes first isn't policy, it's trust. When trust weakens. When trust weakens, people don't experience it as a theory. They feel it in prices, in savings that don't stretch as far, in the sense that effort no longer brings the same reward. This isn't about people making bad choices. It's a predictable result of debt-driven systems playing out over long periods of time. What follows in daily life? As the cycle moves into its later stages, the impact shows up in people's daily lives. In simple ways, the gap between rich and poor grows. The middle class feels squeezed and uncertain. People no longer see the world through the same lens. A common sense of reality starts to fade. Political tension rises, not because people suddenly changed, but because the system around them did. At this stage, money stops being just economic. It becomes political. Internal strain and external competition. Dalio often points out that internal strain weakens countries externally. History shows a consistent pattern. Established powers become debt-heavy and exhausted, while rising powers stay focused, competitive, and productive. Today, this dynamic is visible between the United States and China. The United States appears stretched by debt and internal pressure. China appears disciplined, ambitious, and firmly in the rising phase of the cycle. Dalio does not argue that war is inevitable. He argues that competition is. Why money creation feels like a hidden tax. Dalio frequently explains that creating money is politically easier than raising taxes directly. No bill arrives in the mail. Instead, the cost spreads quietly through inflation. It builds slowly. And over time, the group that feels it most is the middle class. That's why inflation often feels confusing and deeply unfair. What Dalio actually recommends. Dalio does not recommend panic. He does not encourage denial either. He emphasizes that understanding cycles matters more than predicting exact outcomes. As he often explains, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it does repeat for the same underlying reasons. The goal is resilience, not relying on a single system, not trusting permanent stability, not assuming today's rules will last forever. Preparation matters. Panic does not. Final, closing the circle. This isn't about fear, and it isn't about predicting disaster. It's about recognizing where we are in the cycle. World orders don't announce their decline. You feel it in everyday life. And that is why this isn't chaos. It's the cycle that is reaching your life. If this helped you understand the system more clearly, like the video and subscribe. More practical money insights are coming.